Hello and welcome, everyone, or welcome back. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. Hey, Happy Chef. Chair or not chair? This is the question. We are streaming from Twitch and also my Ideas YouTube, which means it's going to be mainly Twitch today. Doing a little bit of just chatting. And we're going to talk about truth. A bit of a philosophy discussion, both kind of outlining some of my ideas, especially early on, or not especially early on, but starting with early on, and the evolution of my relationship with truth. I'm working on a little bit of a project, and so I've been thinking through these things a little bit, and kind of wanted to explore and unpack them a little bit. And I started reading philosophy and approaching the idea of more than just like having facts about reality, an understanding of truth itself. An understanding and truth with a capital T kind of has a special kind of relationship with philosophy. It means like absolute truth, like the truthiest of truth, and I at this point don't think that this type of truth is possible, but this is what I wanted, which is an infallibility. You didn't even look at the title? Yeah, it's gonna be more of a... Also, I suck at spelling. Okay. So the motivation... And I started reading philosophy when I was young. I started reading philosophy when I was like 13 or 14. I started with an introductory compendium, and then I started reading Nietzsche. But when I was like... I think when I was 14, something around there. And the motivation was first this infallibility, or right action requires right knowledge. And this is what I thought. Or this is how I might have explained it. But in truth, part of it was vanity. Seeming or being intelligent. And this is kind of an interesting topic conceptually, especially, I worked with kids for a while, teaching after-school programs chess. And in particular with chess's representation in the media is one where it is often just represented in the media just to portray an intelligence of the character, and it is used as this really cheap and shabby device. And as a consequence, I think that a lot of kids think that if they play chess, they will become intelligent, or something to this effect, or that it is a marcation of intelligence. And so not every kid who plays chess, but certainly a lot of kids who play chess are really concerned with appearing or wanting to be intelligent. And I think about this a little bit with paradox games, because I think that games whose complexity is complex for the sake of complexity, of which paradox games flirts with that line to some extent. This reminds me of the masochism is the point. The masochism of the complexity is the point, because it is an ability to point to one's own vanity. And vanity really kind of came in with Nietzsche, or actually, I think I started to appreciate that there was some vanity involved in here with Nietzsche. Because Nietzsche is a fan of pointing out when people are hypocrites and vain and selfish. Are you gonna tell us you formed a cult? No. No, I did the opposite of forming a cult. I became a hermit. And so, the motivation became very oriented towards an absolute truth. And some of my very early kind of understanding of truth was JTB theory, because I was reading a philosophy compendium. It was like 700 pages thick or something. I don't think I finished it at the time. I was also pretty young. But it starts out with epistemology and theories of truth. And one of the major ones that I think is considered to have some issues, but is maybe a good introduction to the ideas, is justified true belief. This is what knowledge is. And this is the type of answers I was looking for early on. Is very, very straightforward, clear-cut, cannot be ambiguous, you for sure know it type of answers. And this is not only the type of answers, it was concerning what I was concerned with, which was knowledge. But S knows P, if and only if. It is true that P, S believes that P, and S is justified in believing P. Now this has some issues. We could read through a little bit of this. It's been a while since I've studied JTB theory, so I can't exactly unpack it in my opinion, a satisfactory way. But there's also some issues with it. Why don't we read through a little bit of this? It's not too long a passage. Much of the 20th century literature analysis on knowledge began with critique of the three-part traditional analysis of knowledge. So, this is the traditional analysis. Although this analysis does derive from ideas articulated throughout the history of epistemology, it's a bit of a convenient fiction to say that this so-called traditional analysis was ever widely accepted. It was primarily articulated in the 20th century by its attackers, C. Kaplan, we're familiar with Kaplan, Dusant, and Tognaza, and Le Morvan, on the mismatch between the canonical story and the actual intellectual history. There are three components to traditional analysis of knowledge. For this reason, it is sometimes referred to as tripartite analysis of knowledge. According to analysis, justified true belief is necessary and sufficient for knowledge. Now, just to kind of clarify, this is necessary and sufficient conditions. Let's write this down, because we'll come back to this. But when something is necessary, you cannot have an instance of it, or of the thing, without having that trait. So, for example, it is not necessary for mammals to give live birth in terms of the taxonomy of animals, because there's an exception in the platypus who lays eggs. But it is, if something has fur, as far as I understand, it is going to be a mammal. So having fur would be a sufficient condition, except for it's probably going to get a little bit more complicated. And when we return to chairs and creating a definition for things, we'll come back to this. But okay. But back to the tripartite analysis of knowledge. S knows P, if and only if. It is true that P. S believes that P. S is justified in believing P. And this is, an intuitive kind of understanding. And I think it's interesting that the attacks on this really demonstrate, to some extent, how philosophy is about really kind of picking things apart in a lot of ways, and is about having a healthy dose of skepticism. A lot of things in philosophy are rejections of systems rather than the production of systems. Hey, Gaspote. The tripart analysis of knowledge is abbreviated as JTB analysis for justified true belief. Let's consider three conditions in turn. The truth conditions. Most epistemologists agree what is false cannot be known. For example, 84 is not a prime number. Consequently, it could never be the case that anyone knows that 84 is a prime number. One can only know things that are true. For this reason, the traditional theory of knowledge includes that includes, as one of the components of the analysis, As for S that knows P, the condition that it is true that P. Sometimes the explicit invocation of the truth is left out and the relevant condition is simply implied. Alright. Sometimes, when people are very confident of something that turns out to be wrong, it can be natural to describe them as knowing that it is a false proposition. Suppose, for example, in the late sports match, the home team is so far behind that many spectators are very confident that they will lose. If they turn around in the final seconds to achieve a miraculous comeback and win the game, some people might be inclined to say that prior to the comeback, many spectators knew that the home team would lose. Alan Hazlitt argues on the basis of data like this. That's super recent. That knows is not a factive verb. Hazlitt's diagnosis is deeply controversial. Most epistemologists will treat such knowledge descriptions as kind of exaggeration, not literally true. I think that this is maybe an example of something we'll get into, but it's almost as if, or this is kind of what I think is the case, context changes the meaning of words. And this is probably not what Hazlitt would say, but he would consider this a counterexample. That knowledge is not contingent upon something being... So Hazlitt's arguing that knowledge is related to or requires this fact condition. But I would say, or I would argue that knows, in the context that he is using as an example, has a different meaning than what people mean when they are arguing academic philosophy. But continuing on, the analysis of knowledge is about identifying the circumstances under which someone really does know a given proposition. And a proposition is a statement of X is Y, and is held to be a statement about the world, generally. Not necessarily that the circumstances under it might be conventionally acceptable, that is to say, they know. Relatedly, the idea that a proposition is true does not require that anyone can know or prove that it is true. It just requires that it be true. Not all truths are established truths. If you flip a coin and never check to see how it landed, it may be true that it landed heads, even if nobody has any way to tell. Truth is a metaphysical as opposed to epistemological notion. Truth is a matter of how things are, not how they can be shown to be. And this is interesting that there's a disconnection here between the state of affairs, the metaphysical, and what we can know. In general, I think the type of truth that people are looking for often when they want absolute truth is not achievable. And I think this now, but I didn't think this when I was younger. So when we say that only true things can be known, we're not yet saying, because this implies that nothing can be known under this type of condition, we're saying that anyone can access the truth. As we'll say, other conditions have important roles to play here. Knowledge is a kind of relationship with the truth. Alright. We also have the belief condition. Man, this is a little bit longer than I expected. Except I looked at it, so I had the right expectation. The belief condition is only slightly more controversial than the truth condition. The general idea is that the belief condition is that you can only... For those of you who may have come in, we are looking at justified true belief, philosophy, theory of knowledge. So we just finished true portion. The general idea behind the belief condition is that you can only know what you believe. Failing to believe something precludes knowing it. Belief in the context of JTB theory means full belief or outright belief. Not, kind of hedging my bets belief. In a weak sense, one might believe something by virtue of being pretty confident that it's true. In this weak sense, someone who is considered the home team to be a favorite to win the game, even when recognizing the non-trivial possibility of their losing, might be said to believe that the home team will win. Outright belief is stronger. To believe that P, it isn't enough to have a pretty high confidence that P. It is something closer to the commitment of being sure or having settled the question. In the paper laid out explicitly justified true belief by Gettier, actually listed three slightly different tripartite analyses which differed on how this condition was articulated. One of them gives terms of believes in the terms of accept, and one of them in terms of is sure that. And those are two very different ones. Epistemologists tend to follow the Gettier in treating these as effectively equivalent. Effectively equivalent? I don't know. Okay. But there's more discussion, we'll not look into it. Although initially it might seem a bit obvious that P requires believing in P, knowing P requires believing P, a few philosophers have argued that knowledge is, without belief is indeed possible. Suppose Walter comes home from work to find that his house burned down. Shout out to Walter. He says, I don't believe it. Critics of this belief condition might argue that Walter knows his house has been burned down. I certainly would see it. He sees it has. But his words indicate that he does not believe it. The standard response is that Walter's avowal of his disbelief is not literally true. What Walter wishes to convey by saying I don't believe it is not that he really does not believe that his house burned down, but rather he finds it so hard to come to terms with what he sees. If he genuinely didn't believe it, some of his subsequent actions, such as phoning his insurance company, would be rather mysterious. It was very cute, very tongue-in-cheek. I had a point I wanted to make, but I forgot about it. Okay. Colin Radford gave a more substantive critique of the belief condition. Suppose Albert is quizzed on English history. One of the questions is, when did Queen Elizabeth die? Albert doesn't think he knows, but answers the question correctly. Moreover, he gave the correct answer to many questions which he didn't think he had the correct answer. Let's focus on Albert's answer to the question about Elizabeth. Elizabeth died in 1603. Radford makes two claims about the example. Albert does not believe the E, but Albert knows E. Alright. Albert's intuitions about the case like this do not seem to be idiosyncratic. Blake Myers-Schultz and Eric Schwisch-Gebel find evidence suggesting that ordinary speakers tend to react in the way Radford suggests. In support of A, Radford emphasizes that Albert thinks he doesn't know the answer to the question. He doesn't trust his answer because it's a mere guess. In support of B, Radford argues that Albert's answer is not at all a lucky guess. The fact that he answers most of the questions correctly indicates that he actually learned and has never forgotten historical facts. He just doesn't believe them. And so, I hope that this is kind of like illustrating a point, which is that justified true belief as a theory seems really straightforward. Colloquially as, okay, if you are justified in your belief, you believe the thing, and it's true, it seems that you would know the thing. And we'll continue on through this, but this is pushing, this type of analysis and this type of approach that philosophy brought really pushed me towards skepticism. And I was coming from a place of wanting to access pure and complete knowledge of reality, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the type of knowledge that would satisfy some of these various conditions or be satisfactory in an absolute way was not going to be accessible. Since he takes A and B to be true, Radford holds the belief that is not necessary for knowledge. But both of these intuitions are controversial. Some epistemologists might deny A, arguing that Albert does have a tacit belief that E, that's the Elizabeth example, even though it's not that he thinks even though it's not one that he thinks amounts to knowledge. And then C, other guys. Alternatively, one might deny that B, arguing Albert's answer is not an expression of knowledge, perhaps because it's insufficiently confident. See some of these guys on which ways uncertainty can undermine knowledge of belief. Wow, so recent. My thinking or my reading into this type of stuff was in the early 2000s. So, or like before 2010. A little bit before 2010. Maria Antogaza offers quite a different challenging belief condition of knowledge. She rejects the orthodox philosophical understanding of belief, according to which it is kind of doxatic's commitment that does not depend on whether or not it amounts to an apprehension of reality. That's a big sentence. I actually don't know what doxatic means. We're gonna look it up. That's why I don't know what it means. Doxatic knowledge is a type of logic concerned with reasoning about beliefs. Doxatic derives from the ancient Greek doxa, opinion belief, which the English term doxa, popular opinion or belief, is borrowed. Typically, doxatic logic uses the notation this to mean reasoner believes that C is true, and a set denotes a set of beliefs. In doxatic logic, belief is treated as a modal operator. In a complete parallelism between people whose propositions and formal system that derives logic, using doxatic logic, one can express an epistemic counterpart of Gödel's incompleteness theorem of metalogic. Alright. So here we have logical operators. And we'll kind of get back to this in a second. Generalist Ideas live stream? Yeah. Doing something a little bit different. We're going over JTB, Justified True Belief, conditions and philosophy right now. Expecting some attrition in the stream. Also streaming on the Ideas YouTube, so which you are aware of, so it's going to mainly be a Twitch audience. You actually might be one of, yeah, there's probably only going to be a couple people from YouTube. But okay. Holding instead that belief, by its very nature, is cognitive representation supported indirectly by experience. Belief, according to Antigazana, is fundamentally unlike knowledge in that, by definition, one can only believe that which is not directly apprehended. This isn't merely a denial that belief is necessary and sufficient condition for knowledge, on her view, believing that P is actually incompatible with knowing P. This is not a mainstream or widely held belief in the contemporary epistemology, but Gnaza argues that it is supported by considerations of the philosophy of the mind and representation of important historical epistemic tradition. There's a point I'm thinking about making here, and I guess I'll just make it. A lot of these philosophers, also, I recall one of my professors, he talked about someone who was on, I forget what the board's called, but the board for when he was getting his PhD. And this guy's entire work, his life work for 20 years, was the study and articulation of all the, I forget, it's somewhere between 19 and 22, different forms of separation between two objects. So you could have a boundary, you could have a border, you could have a, and I'm not at all able to kind of unpack this, but there's a difference between a boundary and a border, a barrier, there's like more, but it was an interesting thing because you're studying something so incredibly narrow, and then my professor, his speciality, or what his emphasis was in immigration. So the degree of precision required for him to talk about basically crossing the border was extremely high. And to some degree, I think that some people are carving very narrow paths through the English language and the meanings of it in the realm of philosophy. And this knowing that believing is different than knowing is perhaps one such example, and that there's a contention between these types of things. But okay, the justification condition. Why is a third condition necessary? Why not to say that knowledge is true belief? The standard answer has to do with cases where belief may be true even though it's formed improperly. Suppose that William flips a coin and confidently arrives on no particular basis that it will land on tails. If coincidentally the coin does indeed land on tails, then William's belief was true, but such a lucky guess intuitively can't count as knowledge. For William to know, his belief must be grounded in adequate evidential support. Contemporary epistemologists often use justification as the name for the kind of support that is needed here. Recognition for the need of something like this is often traced to Plato's Theaetetus. There's like no way I haven't heard this word pronounced out loud before. Why do I not know how to pronounce that? Where Socrates points out that true opinion in general is insufficient for knowledge. For example, if a lawyer employs sophistry to induce a jury into a belief that something happens to be true, this belief is insufficiently well grounded in knowledge. Where in the place of cosmic fuckery is in the context? Where is the place of belief of cosmic fuckery in this context? Wait, what? Where is the place of belief in cosmic fuckery? I don't know what you mean by belief of cosmic fuckery. That would require a little bit of unpacking. Also, is the chat readable for you guys? I tried to change the chat settings to make it more readable. Like, not playing over a video game. Although justification is the standard contemporary name for the condition in question, this label is relatively recent development and can carry some potentially misleading connotations. In the ordinary sense, and this all together, one of my gripes with Western philosophy is they feel that words have the same meaning in multiple contexts, and I really don't think this is the case. I think the meaning of words shifts. And an example that's come up on stream somewhat recently, someone asked me if I believed in God, and I told them in an academic context that I would consider myself agnostic, but in a kind of more layman context, if I'm talking to someone who I know is not an academic or not in academic philosophy, or I don't know that they are, I would call myself an atheist. Chat is very readable. Awesome. In an ordinary sense, something might count as justified only after someone has successfully undertaken the project of justifying it. Understood in this way, the idea that true belief must be justified in order to count as knowledge would mean that in order for S to know P, so for a person to know a proposition, S must have given a positive defense of their belief that P demonstrating their belief is appropriate. Epistemologists who endorse a justification condition on knowledge do not typically mean that condition is understood in such a strong way. Absolutely not. For example, you might know that your pen will drop if you release it over nothing, but it'll drop and fall from the air, but you haven't tested this. Or you've tested it, but on other objects. Rather, what they typically intend to suggest is that only that S's belief is P is knowledge only if the belief is appropriately supported by S's evidence. This might be so even if S is not engaged in actively justifying their belief. Consider, for example, an ordinary person's belief that 5 plus 5 equals 10. Most people have never attempted to justify this belief, and probably would be at a loss to how to go about justifying it. But for most people, this belief would qualify as an instance of knowledge. For this reason, it's important to understand the role of justification condition in the analysis of knowledge, not to simply assume that justification is a dialectical activity in which the believer must have engaged. Some epistemologists use different labels for this condition above, such as an idea as irrational or forewarned or as evidentially supported. And then this guy has an additional critique of the justification label. I think that we won't continue on here past this, but just kind of return to this is what we've been discussing, is whether or not this is good at definition. This is traditionally the definition that gets attacked. And coming back, I was looking for a truth of this matter and beginning to see, okay, there's quite a bit of skepticism. And then I kind of turned towards trying to build up knowledge from nothing. We'll come back to necessary and sufficient conditions. And something resembling the Tractatist. Pretty sure I varied 5 plus 5 on the abacus in grade 1, no? They mean of a separate sort of way. Like, they mean of a logical proof type of way. But that was what my first thought was, too. When you have, as a kindergartner or first grader or whatever, with some of the, teaching tools where you have, blocks, if you add 5 blocks to another 5 blocks, you get the 10 block chain, right? But trying to build all up knowledge from nothing. And we won't read into it too much. But there's a particular philosopher, his name is Wittgenstein, and he wrote the Tractatus Logio Philosophicus, which he later kind of regretted in terms of thinking. But the goal in the Tractatus was to start with nothing and proceed to produce out of nothing a basis for knowledge. And I read the Tractatus. I actually read the Tractatus, the majority of the time I read it, I was actually intoxicated, which is an anecdote that's not much relevant to anything, but I remember because I wasn't intoxicated enough that it was very striking as a piece of philosophy, because I thought it was just very brutally rigorous in a inconsequential way. It was aesthetically pleasing in terms of philosophy. But I don't think that the kind of premises and the way that it started from really work, and so I think the entire thing is not useful as a piece of philosophy. But this is the kind of place I was coming from at the time. Is the type of place where writing something like the Tractatus would have been what I would do, and this is probably in my early college years. Where I was concerned with the way that the meaning of things would change. Okay, and so Tractatus starts out like this. And this might be kind of what the justification you're talking about looks like. The world is everything that is the case. The world is the totality of facts, not things. The world is determined by facts, and these being all the facts. For the totality of facts determine both what is the case and also what is not the case. The facts in the logical space are the world. The world divides into facts. Anyone can either be the case or not the case. Everything can remain the same. What is the case? The fact is the existence of atomic facts. So he goes from 1.1 to 1. Makes several points, comes on to the next point. And from this, basically from nothing, he continues on. And if we go maybe somewhere in the middle, we will see that he progresses quite a way. Let's skip the one that says God in it. If the truth expression of a proposition follows from the truth of others, this expression itself, in relation in which the form of these propositions stand to one another, and we do not need to put them in these relations, first connecting them with one another and proposition, for the relations are internal and exist as soon as, and the very fact that propositions exist. And he eventually concludes, let's pull a snippet, like, completely devoid of context as we get kind of later. We start speaking German, or is this just a dual translation? This must be a dual translation. I don't remember. I was not this intoxicated. I don't remember. Yeah. He concludes with, wherever one cannot speak, therefore one must be silent. And then I was encountering difficulties, and because it seemed that you really couldn't say much about reality whatsoever. And if you can't say much about reality, what's the point in knowing anything? And, like, the type of logic that was required was categorical logic, predicate logic. We have something known as a proposition. A proposition is a statement about reality. As X is P is a proposition, right? So, we could say that a bowl cut is a bad haircut, right? And that's a proposition. It's an expression of taste. It's not objectively true, but it's a proposition. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find propositions that are true, that say something meaningful about reality. And one of the ways you can kind of, like, guarantee stuff is true is through categorical logic. And the very most simple kind of example of categorical logic is modus ponens, or it's a logical, not argument, pattern known as modus ponens. It's where we say there's kind of an expression of three parts. If P is true, then Q is true. So if So I think the example that most commonly gets used is Socrates is a man. Or it's all men are mortal. Okay? So if something is a man, then they are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Is often the example that gets used. And here, example gets used, if today is Tuesday, then John will go to work. Today is Tuesday, therefore John will go to work. And it seems like you can kind of try and piece together some sort of thing about this, but one of the issues is that categories are problematic. Categories are problematic in a variety of ways, but one of the ones I kind of noticed was context shifting. Is that categories seem to have different meanings depending on your context. And I remember in college, there was one particular example I took a long time with, which was that the notion that you could have 5 cows. And what it was meant to have 5 cows. And I can't remember the entirety of my arguments regarding this, but I do remember that there were several issues. Is that numbers imply, to have 2 of anything, it implies those 2 things are identical, and the 2 cows could never be identical. But there would be levels of abstraction wherein you would apply numbers to something. And so you could say, okay, we have 5 cows, and there's 5 things having traits typical of the cow. But then if you worked on a farm, you could also answer the question, I have 10 pieces of livestock. And now, it's 5 cows and 5 chickens. Now, those things are very much not identical. And that's a shifting of the abstraction. But if Lucy is one of your cows, you can't have... well, you can name multiple cows Lucy, but you can't have 2 of the exact same thing. And so, in some sense, numbers are context dependent. Because the abstraction you're having is one in which the number coherently applies to it. Because to say you have 2 of the exact same cow versus 2 cows versus 2 pieces of livestock, the numbers are all being applied to the same individual thing, but the context is really shifting when the numbers are appropriate, or something to this effect. But for me, one of the issues is that as soon as you count the cows, or you attempt to insert the cows into a piece of proposition, the meaning of what you were saying, or the meaning of assigning numbers to the thing, would change. And then, just like racism, someone says. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm not sure exactly what I had said right before you typed that. I inserted the cows into a burger. Well, that's another thing, is you can call cows certain pounds of beef. But one of the things is stuff is impossible to define. Or stuff is very difficult to define. In order to do something like assign numbers to something, we have to be able to define the category perfectly. This type of logic, for X is P, in order to do this, you have to know exactly what X is and exactly what P is. And one of the problems is that categories are basically impossible to define with necessary and sufficient conditions. And then we'll put without appealing to tautology, or... And this kind of brings us to the title of the stream. What is a chair? And in order to define this in such a way that we exclude all non-chairs and include all chairs, because if we have a claim about reality, if we have a proposition, which is a claim about reality, regarding chairs, then we have to know what exactly a chair is. in order to be able to absolute truths about the chair. Right, and if you want absolute knowledge, you have to be able to define stuff. And then, how do we define chair? Such that we include all chair objects and exclude all non-chairs. And I'm convinced that this is an impossible task. Definition of chair can change over time. If something can change over time, then we can't say we can't have absolute truth. A chair would probably have been first denied as stationary, but now we have wheelchairs. Is a wheelchair a chair? I think I would be okay with a wheelchair being a chair. Headphones are on the fritz. Apologies. Hey, Ham. How's it going? I hope you didn't raid me. If you did, you just threw your viewers into some shit. We're trying to define chair. I'm convinced that this is an impossible task. I would argue it's a subset of the set of chairs, so you would argue that it's a member. So whatever definition we have for chair has to include wheelchair. I'll take a crack at it. I've written about this. Let's consider the proposition a chair is a piece of furniture. One of the things is, not all things that have wheels that you can sit in, like a wheelchair, are chairs. Glad I stumbled into this. Yeah, we're talking epistemology in this bizzle. A chair is an object, or it is a method to express an action. Can we, with that, put all things into category? You need to define furniture? We're getting ahead of ourselves. We're trying to define chair here. We're trying to define chair here. But you're seeing where the problem is leading, huh? Let's start off with this. 4 legs and a seat for sitting are mutually necessary and mutually sufficient. And, okay. This would exclude something like a bar stool, right? And we could have a 3-legged chair. Or a 5-legged chair. We could have rocket chairs. A chair is something approaching a platonic form of a chair. Approaching. Oh, see, here's the thing, is like, approaching. You're saying we can have something that's a degree of a chair. I'm inclined to agree with this, but then you can't use categorical logic for it. Are we assuming chair and seat are the same thing? Here's another thing. This is getting a little circular in here, aren't we? Getting the rabbit hole of defining features. Yeah, I'm trying to illustrate a very important point here. In order to know absolute truths, we have to be able to do this. So, rocking chairs, wheelchairs. Is this basically a grad level course on philosophy? This might be something you would encounter in Philosophy 100. What is a chair? Although the broader implications that I'm going to get into would be a little bit less. Something you sit on? Yeah. So we could change the definition. Anything you sit on resting your body. Okay. What if my girlfriend sits on my lap? Do I become a chair? Or was I always a chair? Can you know by looking at me if I was always a chair that I am a chair? A tree stump is a seat, not a chair. Object doesn't have to be wooden to be a chair. Cannot be found naturally. Humans have to alter the object in some way to construct a chair. Cannot be found naturally. So humans have to alter the object. So let's expand this. Plus, cannot be found naturally. Humans have to alter it. What about a painting of a chair? It's not for sitting or resting the body. Can you not have a painting of a chair? Because it's not for resting? There's a fundamental acknowledgement that we human have a chemical makeup that we do, and being carbon-based life forms might also be different than other beings interacting with question of what constitutes the consistency of a chair. Yeah, so a chair for me is different than a chair for a fly, isn't it? Do chairs only exist in relation to humans? This is another objection. I would love at the end of this, it all ties somehow to control at EU5. It's not going to. Would being on a different perspective or interacting the way we do interact in some way? Well, it seems that if something's a chair, it should actually be a chair, and it shouldn't be contingent upon humanity, should it? Wait, if it's a 1 to 10 model of Barbie chair, is it a chair or not? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Or 1 to 10 model size of a chair. 1/10 model. We'll put this. The end result is you have very unprofitable furniture. So and we could try and do stuff a little bit better. We could say that I mean, we're already encountering significant problems. In some of my examples I have is something that is... Is it shift tab? Yeah, shift tab goes back. There's a back and a seat for sitting. And the girlfriend example also works here. I have a back, and you could argue it's a seat for sitting, but also a horse. Is a horse a chair? And a seat for sitting. A seat for sitting. Is this not circular? A chair is something that has a chair for chairing, or is function for chairing. A painting of a chair is fine. Chair is there as an adjective for the painting rather than a chair itself. It's an idea but unusual. Ah! I like where you're going. Have you heard of Duchamp's fountain? This is an art piece made by Marcel Duchamp. It is a urinal, and if we kind of think of a urinal in a parallel type of definition to our understanding of chair, this is for pissing in, right? It is an actual object. It's also called the fountain. This is a piece of art. This is not for pissing in. This is stone cold a urinal, though. Or is it? Because if this were a chair instead of a urinal, this would not be for sitting. But it would be the self-same object as a chair. So it would involve the intention. I do believe in things. The intention of the person who created it matters. Okay. So Duchamp's urinal is not a chair because Duchamp did not mean for people to piss in it. Although, if you like performative art, that would be a very good instance of performative art. Unless you're watching The Sweetest Thing, in which case a urinal is a chair. Fair. The intention created is, what if the object was created to be a chair? If no, it could still be a chair, but if yes, it's definitely a chair. One of the problems here is, can I not know if something is a chair? Unless I know the intent. So now the intention of the thing, I think, is probably approaching something that is going to properly include and exclude objects. But the problem is now I have to consult with the maker of the thing to know. And I have not talked to the person who made this. And because of that, I can't know if it's a chair or not. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing. I had an effort, and we'll just copy and paste, kind of. This as well. And it's somewhat similar to the direction Ham was taking. What's the pace with our formatting? A seat that appears to be for sitting, independent of context that might render it inappropriate, is necessary and sufficient. I still think it's not good enough. But what if you bought a chair that sold a chair and you knew the intention of the company that made it? Transitive property of a chair? If I encounter something in a junkyard, though, I can never know if it's a chair, can I? So when does language and common understanding come into play? We could go there now. But that's a good point regarding the junkyard. Yeah. Also, if someone assembles a chair, if someone makes an object not intending for it to be a chair, sells it, and then someone buys it, and then sells it as a chair, you would be left in a situation where something's being sold as a chair, but the intention of the person creating it was not to create a chair. And you would not know because it's being sold as a chair. Like, someone could make something as an art piece, and then someone could buy it in an estate sale, not knowing the provenance. So intention of the maker matters without knowledge of the maker's intention. Definition can be assigned in the absence of the original intention. So we have two definitions. One where we have context and one where we don't. Or are you saying that regarding this one? Yeah, the appears is doing a lot of heavy lifting, I think. An unsatisfactory amount of heavy lifting. It appears to be for this. And then it appeals to contexts. I think we have some problems. Are there statements assumed to be true before asking this chair question? I want to be precise. But I don't think we have any premises, but like I would not say that you can't, using some sort of definition, try and do that. You could change appears to primary purpose. Primary purpose for sitting. Well, appears is partially in there because I think something that is a painting of a chair, or a picture of a chair, or a piece of art that's a chair appears to be for sitting, but it has a context that renders that such sitting inappropriate, but it still appears to be so. Peg, did you attention to you more than Vicky 3 Rowan? Portugal is suffering because this. Portugal would have suffered anyways. What is an object? Here's another thing, is every single one of these we have to define. We would have to define seat. We would have to define what it means to appear. Sitting. Etc. And, you know, something to be said of the English language just in general, the way all words are defined is just by relation to other words. You look in the dictionary, it's just other words. And in some sense, everything is circular, pointing back at it. I meant a specific object. What is a specific object? I'm not sure what you're asking. And so with this chair business, the main point is a chair is not a very complicated thing. I don't know what Tokipona is, but maybe. I was trying to... Okay, gotcha. A chair seems like not a complicated thing. If we can't do this with a chair, how are we going to do this with justice, freedom, morality, right action, things of substance? If we cannot even possibly define chair using necessary and sufficient conditions, which is required for a proposition to evaluate whether or not this is true, we actually can get basically nowhere. And so, actually, before prototype theory, I reached a place of, let's call terminal skepticism. Not technical term. This is not, as far as I know, this is not a technical term in philosophy, but it was this notion that really nothing could be known. In a way that is an absolute sense. Because of difficulties regarding categories that the chair example really highlights, I think. And perhaps some theoretical knowledge is possible, but practical knowledge is not. Was kind of where I was at. Because I was trying to arrive at knowledge of this type. Propositions. Using categorical logic notion of things, where we need to have a definition for chairs that includes all chairs and excludes not all non-chairs. And it seems really hard to do that. And kind of a parallel track here. To this kind of searching for truth in an absolute sense was one of the reasons why the motivation for this is, or seeking kind of understanding of truth, is right action requires right knowledge. And right action is a practical concern. The authority on the object defines it. Original maker is the original authority. You sit on a chair at an art gallery. Alright, we're taking one more. Authority on the object defines it. Here's the issue. To me, a chair cannot be a chair independent of humanity. And chair status may change as the authority chairs. But also, who determines authority? If one guy says he is an authority and says something is a chair, and one guy is an authority, or one guy claims to authority and says it's a chair, and one guy claims authority and says it's not a chair, how do we determine if something's a chair? I could sleep at night with that definition? I couldn't. Although it's too divorced from the state of affairs of the physical object itself I think. Like, if I'm the ultimate chair authority, Ham, and I hold this up and I say, this is a chair for sitting. It becomes a chair. Authority changes, wars are fought. What authority do people follow? I guess it comes back to, do people sit in it or not? No. Is this a chair? Yeah. Despite the name, wheelchair is not a chair. I'm not entirely sure I would agree. But if no one believes it... No. Everyone believes me. I'm the recognized authority on the chairs. This is a chair. We're entering a thought experiment where if everyone considers me an authority, and I say this is a chair, this is just like all the other objects you use for sitting. With the authority definition, this is a chair. But consensus, I think consensus I prefer to authority. For practical reasons, but not for, like, necessary sufficient conditions. If everyone believes you about the scissor chair, then it is a scissor chair. No, it's not a scissor chair. I don't know what you're saying about scissors. This is just a chair, man. Just a regular, good old-fashioned chair. Behold, my chair. Okay. People call it EDM music because music authority says so. Who in chat thinks this is a chair? Does anyone disagree? Just a regular chair. I'll poll the YouTube, but probably only like 4 YouTube viewers. Well, there's 7. Holy. This is a chair. 2 + 2 = 5. There's an amazing Mikhail Tal quote, chess player, known for creating really complex positions and sacrificing material. He said, "You must take your opponent into a deep, dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5, and the path leading out is only wide enough for one." Oceania is at war with East Asia? Yeah. It's not a chair because you're not an authority. Well, Ham, you're saying I'm not an authority, but if the rest of chat thinks I'm an authority, that's a chair. What about memes? Richard Dawkins? Is a chair a successful meme? That's similar to Ham's definition, because for Dawkins, a meme is a cultural unit. I mean, I think I'm inclined to agree with you, but that's not a necessary sufficient condition type of condition. It's pointing back to humanity is the issue, not the object in itself. This will help me with my furniture factories in Victoria 3. Thank you, Generalist. You're welcome. Glad I could be of assistance. This is all being discussed via language, so wouldn't that vector mean perpetual ambiguity? But yeah, this is another issue as well. Just kind of in the background here is that the definition of all words is pointing back to other words. Independent of us ragging on the inability to define chair, I think embodied experience is what... All words point back to other words, which, at their very root, point back to, like, metaphorical association with embodied experience. And embodied experience is like the building blocks of our reality from which we construct language and then can perform operations with it. We all know what a chair is, we don't have to discuss it. I'm Wittgensteinian about these. Wittgenstein would say that there's no such thing as an absolute truth, there's just language games type of thing. Or hold that thought. Late Wittgenstein would say that. Early Wittgenstein would be like, we can know chairs or we should not talk of them. But this something kind of in parallel with this search of truth was an idea that I had very early on that is generally a little striking to people in philosophy, which is, I would say, I'd rather believe something and this is kind of pointing to the right action is right knowledge, motivation for trying to seek knowledge that is useful than something that is true. And this is a nuanced thing because usually the truth is useful. I think if fundamentally we agree first is what is communication real? An absolute or relative can be an authority. Wittgenstein changed his mind, so hope springs eternal. Love the note you wrote asking if my girlfriend sits on my lap, do I become a chair? Because it presupposes that Generalist could ever imagine such a concept despite the fact that he's never seen a woman. Jesus. Jesus. The burn. Of all the people who have sat on things, who has survived? Where was that in chat? People who use the correct definition of chair to survive sitting more often. Okay, I like that one too. We've nailed down what's a chair. Targa's going for the low-hanging fruit. Talk about playing Victoria, right? But overwhelmingly, usually the truth is useful. There are a few counterexamples, and I spent quite a bit of time thinking through this. But there is the Pygmalion effect. So, somehow Darwinism and philosophy co-joins. What a day to witness. We're getting there. We're bringing it all together. When we look up Rosenthal effect, we get the Pygmalion effect in terms of the result. The Pygmalion effect is a psychological phenomenon in which high expectations lead to improved performance in a given area. So, just to kind of clarify where we're going with this, in instances where belief affects reality and outcome, it is better to believe the more useful thing than the more true thing. Probabilistically, the low expectation might be better, but if high expectation leads to improved performance, high expectation is more useful. It gained this name after the Greek myth of Pygmalion, the sculptor who fell in love so much with the perfectly beautiful statue he created that statue came to life. Psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson present a view that has been called into question as a result of later research findings in their book Pygmalion in the Classroom. Womp womp. I'm not sure I've read contention here, but I'm familiar with the study. Borrowing something of the myth by advancing the idea that teachers' expectation of their students affects the students' performance. Rosenthal and Jacobson held that high expectations lead to better performance and low expectations lead to worse performance, both being example of self-fulfilling prophecy. According to the Pygmalion effect, the targets of the expectations internalize their positive labels, and with those positive labels, succeed accordingly. A similar process works in the opposite direction in the case of low expectations. The idea behind the Pygmalion effect is that increasing the leader's expectation of the follower's performance will result in the better follower's performance. Pygmalion effect remains controversial among social psychologists because researchers have repeatedly failed to replicate the original finding. This is a new rabbit hole for me. Let's actually not look at that immediately on stream. The reason why I did that is because sometimes stuff will, like, autocomplete your address and shit. This article shows that 35 years of empirical research on teacher expectations justify the following conclusions. Self-fulfilling prophecies in the classroom do occur, but these effects are typically small. They do not accumulate greatly across perceivers or over time, and they may be more likely to dissipate rather than accumulate. And B, powerful self-fulfilling prophecies may selectively occur among students from stigmatized social groups. Interesting. And C, whether or not self-fulfilling prophecies affect intelligence or whether, in general, they do more harm than good remains unclear. And D, teacher expectations may predict student outcomes more because these expectations are accurate than because they are self-fulfilling. Implications for future research, the role of self-fulfilling prophecies, and perspectives emphasizing the power of erroneous beliefs to create social reality are discussed. So it sounds like there's a bit of a mixed bag. But I was a big fan of referencing this particular thing. And I don't think this is the only instance where belief affects things, although it is striking to see that apparently this is more controversial than I had understood. I always wondered why George Bernard Shaw called that play Pygmalion. I never knew why until I looked it up. There's also an effect where you punish for unpopular beliefs. It is safer to actually believe popular things than try to pretend to. This is another thing, is it's antagonist to iconoclasm, but this is also true. There's another kind of counterexample, but I've forgotten it. Is it really that belief affects causes the improved outcome, or the holding the belief correlates with improved outcomes? I think there are instances where it affects outcomes, but the study that I commonly reference apparently is controversial on that fact. So I'd have to look into it more and try and figure things out and nail it down before pointing to that study some more. Communication is absolute. Then definitions might have stable authority beyond individual speakers. If communication is relative, then any definition shared depends on shared context. I'm inclined to agree. But if it's dependent on shared context, then propositions can't have absolute truth. As it stands now, I was trying to figure out absolute truths. Is that chair part of the replication crisis in psychology? There are issues with replication because you don't get brownie points for replicating stuff. You get brownie points for, like, shitting on stuff too. I already know your address based on triangulating your pizza order timings. Not like this. Not like this. Yeah. But okay. I'd rather believe something useful than is true. There's a secondary thing here. Which is that belief is an action. Belief occupies attention. What you pay attention to affects lived experience. And then this was a conclusion I came to later. It's probably not worth spending so much attention on epistemological investigation of truth if they... Here, we'll make a capital T truth, because that's the truth we're talking about. If they won't yield anything substantive. And attention is and remains kind of a big focus of kind of the lens through which I look at things. Is you have like a limited pie of things you can focus on. And to the extent that you want to achieve useful beliefs, there's actually utility determines where you spend your attention too. And believing something, regardless of whether or not it's true, is an investment of your attention that may not be worth it. I think there are absolute truths, but we can never be sure of them. I think that reality is a particular way. I'm not sure that there are absolute truths in the formation of a proposition of X is P, formulated in language. But there are facts about reality that's how reality is. But I think that anytime we try and capture reality with a sentence or a proposition, it's not going to work in an absolute sense. Where's the piss jug? Bro, I don't have a full piss jug. It's going to be a short stream. I was really into the discussion like this in college. Post-college, I started thinking, is this exploration benefiting you in any way? The answer is no. Yeah. But this is generalist kind of maybe halfway through philosophy degree. It's kind of here. I actually think I grew most intellectually after I got my degree. But okay. Then we get prototype theory. Prototype theory and grounding in metaphor. So this is Lakoff. But the idea is categories are radial and have degrees of belonging. This rejects Western philosophical objectivism outright. But I do think it correctly describes how we do categories. Which is that if I say a chair, you actually think of a chair. You think of a specific chair. And the degree to which you think something is a chair is actually the degree to which that object resembles the prototype in your mind. Here we have a chair. It's like cloud, it exists even if you can't define the edges exactly. And also, a beanbag chair is less of a chair than this is. It's not a binary thing. With this type of understanding of definitions or categories, can we get rid of this? There we go. No, that's a pair of scissors. You're right, Ham. How right you are. It's a pair of scissors. And okay, this is a chair, but it's not only a chair, it's a prototype of a chair. It's a picture of a chair, not like this. I mean, it's not even a picture of a real chair, right? It's a cartoon drawing of a chair. But when I think of chair, this is what I think about. But there's a secondary part of what we were saying there, which is the metaphorical grounding part, which I think is significant. And that is that all our definitions for things point to other words. And our original... So, language is relational. Not just person to person, but internally, word to word. Our original notions of words are informed by embodied experience. And I'm not prepared to unpack this in a way I think is entirely satisfactory. But, to some degree, I've done it in some of my book reviews, either Women, Fire, and Dangerous Things or Metaphors We Live By George Lakoff. But a really good example is that, or at a very baseline example, is the notion of good is up. And this is informed by the embodied experience of open body language. We tend to, when we feel threatened, close down our body language as a natural response to protect our internal organs. This is a biological thing. So when we're closed down, that's bad. When we feel safe, we open up. We open up. We stand up. This type of thing. And a lot of expressions and language that we use to refer to things uses this embodied notion. Like the stock market, the good portion of the stock market is up. You're feeling up. You're feeling down today. These very baseline notions inform, because good doesn't mean anything. Good is an abstraction that is informed, that needs to point back to something. And so when we have I'm feeling up, I'm feeling down, these things are good. We have good points back to the feeling up and down, which points back to the embodied experience of the way in which we close ourselves when we feel threatened. This is a projection of light blasting from the screen onto my eyes. I see you're doing a philosophy stream. Nice. Yes. For those of you on Twitch, the VOD's going to be on the Ideas YouTube. You know what's funny? We say a pair of scissors, so that means a blade with a handle is a scissor, but if someone says, give me the scissors, you give them 2 knives, you are wrong. I'm sure there's some etymological reason, but yeah. Tall guys get girls, this guy gets it. Want to hang out today? Yeah, I'm down. Take that, liberal. Everything about that interaction is negative. Being down and feeling down are 2 different things, though. I wish I had found metaphors we live by to kind of show this. But, an example I like a lot is, what is a lie? And we tried to define chair. Can't really define chair using necessary and sufficient conditions. But we can define lie. And for philosophy, objectivist, necessary and sufficient, might say a lie is speaking something that is not a state of fact. So saying something untrue, to say something untrue is to lie. And I actually think this is a really poor definition, and I think prototype theory can give us a much better definition, which is a lie has prototypical conditions. The thing is I can deceive someone without saying something. I can deceive without saying untruth. And I can unintentionally speak mistruth. And I can speak mistruth without maliciousness. And the argument here is that there is a best example of a lie when all the conditions are met. Metaphors we live by is great and all, but have you ever considered metaphors we die by? Live by the sword, die by the sword. Also a metaphor. Big true. But this is like the best example of a chair. To me. To me, a chair is wooden, it has a back, it has 4 legs in its prototype. But there are prototypical conditions for a lie. And one of them is that the statement is actually untrue. But this is actually not that important. I believe there's 3 or 4, I can't remember. Another one is the intention to deceive. This is the most important. And then also what you are saying you believe to be false. And we'll go through these one at a time. But we'll see that the way that we define stuff, if we use prototypical conditions, leads to much different definitions. Typically, if you say something and you are mistaken on the information, it is inappropriate to call you a liar. You're just dumb, right? Or you are misinformed is actually the better answer. The most important thing is that you intend to deceive in regards to a lie. And a really good example of this is white lies. Generally speaking, if your girlfriend asks, do I look fat in this dress, and you say no, type of interactions, it would be inappropriate to call you a liar and freak out at you. Also, there's a secondary layer there in that when she asks you, does this dress make me look fat, that's actually not the literal question she's asking you. She's asking you more so for a positive comment, so treating it as a question of, does this dress make me look fat, like the actual question itself, is not even an appropriate response. But if you were to treat it as a on-the-surface question and you say, no, the dress doesn't, which isn't even really a good answer, you're keeping stuff on an even keel. It satisfies this condition of a statement being untrue. To some extent, it satisfies this condition, yeah, but it doesn't satisfy this condition. Your intention's not actually to deceive someone. Your intention is to keep things on an even keel, and or make your girlfriend feel better. Hey, you are running away without establishing the definition of lie? I'm saying I'm not doing this. I'm saying that this is... we don't do this anymore. Where's the strike through? How do we do strike through? Alt-Shift-5. That better be it. I think that is it. We don't do that ish no more. We tried to do it with chairs. We realized we can't do it with a chair. How are we going to do it with a lie? We got a new system. Prototypical conditions. But there's an example I like a lot. We'll use another example and then we'll do the one I like. Julius Caesar died over 60 years ago. If someone asks me, was Julius Caesar from ancient history, and I said Julius Caesar died over 60 years ago, that statement is not actually untrue. That's a true statement. It's not false, but the only reason I would frame it in that sort of way is if I'm intending to deceive. Or I'm intending to make a joke. It would probably make a joke. But the example I like, you're telling me that Julius Caesar, who died well over 60 years ago, made this salad? The example that I like is, I've known my mother for over 3 months. I have. I swear to God. And if I was at some sort of social greeting, meet and greet, party type thing, and I was applying for a job somewhere, and someone asks, oh, how do you know XYZ? Which is my mother's name. And I said, that, for example, was something that was untrue, that my joke there, that was something that was untrue, but my intention was to make a joke. So it's not really a lie. Or it's a poor example of a lie, but it is a lie. But okay, continuing on. And they asked me, oh, and I put on my I put on my resume my mother as a reference. And they ask, oh, how do you know XYZ? And I say, oh, I've known her for over 3 months. That's true. That statement's actually true. And what I'm saying is not false. But what I'm doing is decidedly intending to deceive them on the fact that she is indeed XYZ is my mother. And I'm doing that to manipulate them into valuing them as a reference more by virtue of concealing that they are going to be biased towards me. Right? And so as a consequence of this, this is actually a better example of a lie than, no, that dress doesn't make you look fat. Because the intention to deceive is there, despite it not being the other two things. And in general, what you should be upset about when someone lies to you is if they are intending to manipulate you, more so than anything else. And so, anytime any one of these conditions are present, you can say that it's a lie, but the best examples of a lie are when all three are present, which means that lie is a radial category. There are members that belong to the category in very slight ways, and there are members that are really good examples of it. And it's not a binary thing. Something's not a lie or not a lie. There are degrees of lying. There's a theory that little children don't lie with an intent to deceive, but with an intent to speak a better truth into existence. It's maybe fair. Children are not particularly complicated in terms of their ability to understand abstract concepts. They're also really bad at lying. But I think that they know when they lie, because they'll do stuff like cover their mouth. Or they know that there's an inappropriateness to what they've done. Honey, I didn't lie. The dress does not make you look fat. You just are fat. Yeah, basically. And now she can't get mad because I've not lied? Yes. Joke's on you, buddy. The question, does this dress look, is there's like another thing going on here. And that is... Here, let's make this go down one more. Oftentimes, our communication is not literally what we say. The above is not really a question, but a request for validation. Right? The function of the utterance, does this dress make me look fat, is not actually information seeking. Right? And we do this all the time. Like, hey, what's up? Or hey, how you doing? That is often a performative gesture of like greeting someone rather than actually trying to get to the bottom of things. Like the chair, the intent of the speaker matters in defining the lie. Oh, absolutely. But we're also playing a different game too. I think defining chair with prototypical conditions is pretty easy. Because we don't have to exclude all non-chairs and include all chairs perfectly. We can have a fuzzy definition. XYZ is crazy name. Does it matter that being misinformed is a lie? It's a lie, but it's a poor example of a lie. I don't know. I have kids. Sometimes they just lie. No greater truth. Prototype theory is a circular way of approaching the problem of knowledge. We are rejecting the Western notion of knowledge as something that's possible. How do you define prototype for the category of objects that weigh more than 1 gram? Objects when you place them on a scale that typically score more than 1 gram, but like obviously if you're not on Earth, this is not going to work. So planet you're on matters. But the part of what we're saying here though is that the absolute truth that we are seeking when we are trying to get the absolute truth that requires the definition that excludes all things, every single thing that is not a chair and includes all things that are chairs in a binary way. We're not trying to do that anymore. So we're defining a lie, but does the definition imply a lie is a bad thing? Is lying bad? No, but someone being deceived is... I think that this is the thing you should be upset about. Yeah, I think a lie is bad, actually. There's There's a lot of examples like this. What we think of the thing informs the language, even though, and there's a parallel. There's, like, the difference between an excuse and a reason, there's really not, like, a definitional difference. Same with killing and murder. Murder is generally regarded as an unjustified killing. Killing is more morally ambiguous. An excuse is something that is legitimate. Both an excuse and a reason are an explanation for why you failed to meet some expectation, but an excuse is regarded as illegitimate, and a reason is regarded as legitimate. After Halloween, and my kids have had too much candy, I get to the point where I say, oh, sorry, it's all gone. But it's not gone. It's a lie. It is a lie. I'm deceiving. But the intention is for their own good. Lying and deceiving can be good. I think that that's true, but also generally deceiving people is bad. I also think that, your kids, if they knew, would not appreciate that approach. Right? And if someone had that approach to me as an adult, I would be offended. And annoyed. But also kids can be a huge pain in the ass. Like, I think in an ideal, like, platonic world, you would explain to the kids somehow that them eating more candy is not good for them. But here's the thing, is like when you try and do that, they just won't accept your explanation. I've actually given a lot of candy to kids when I was teaching chess at after-school programs. And when they would get more than one piece of candy, I explained to them, much to their chagrin, diminishing marginal utility. I asked them if they've ever gotten sick from eating too much candy, as one can. And by the way, explaining this to second graders is psychotic, but this is what I did. Because I thought it was really funny, because after like a 5-minute explanation, or not 5 minutes, but after explaining marginal utility and diminishing marginal utility, I'd tell them to tell their parents that they learned about diminishing marginal utility. But because I thought that was hilarious to do. Because I'm a massive troll. But the idea is, when you have your first candy bar, boy, that's great. When you have your 50th candy bar, you actually probably hate it. The most valuable candy bar is always the first candy bar. So what you should do, even though you got multiple pieces of candy, you should have one piece of candy a day, because you will get more overall enjoyment out of your candy if you eat it in that way. That's the way to get the most marginal utility, or the most utility out of all of your candy, because every additional piece of candy you have is less useful for you than the first. I think it's helpful to get caught up in the is odd here. You don't need to apply a moral framework to define a lie. Yeah, I mean, I also think that generally lies are bad, but like, I think you can introduce situations where they're not. Like if someone asks, are you harboring Jews under your floorboards, and they're an SS officer, you just say no, right? But there's more complicated things, because like actions, you could argue that Ham's example of deceiving his kids about the candy is he's doing two things. Is he is lying, and he's also making it so that his kids have better nutrition. And one of those is good and one of those is bad, or something like this. How do you know if someone else intends to deceive? Isn't that based on knowing what counts as deception? How are you going to define that? Well, we would define it out as in prototypical way, in a prototypical condition way. We could define... I don't have a definition for deception using prototypical conditions. But it would be something to the tune of having a notion of what you think is the case, and trying to induce in others the belief that that is not the case. To counter my own point, I guess I could say it's what is healthier for them is to say we have candy and explain why it's unhealthy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But having dealt with kids, I really understand the idea that sometimes you have to pick your battles. Although I was really bad at this with kids. I would explain things to kids. I would explain them until they were bored as hell. Like I explained the difference between, I remember one class, it was like actual like first graders. And I said something about necessary and sufficient conditions, and then I said, you guys won't like the explanation for that. And they were like, no, we want to hear the explanation, because generally when kids are told that they won't like something, they want to hear it. And then I'm like, fine. I will tell you the difference between necessary and sufficient conditions. And then I did that, and they never asked me to do that again. Again, this is like kind of me being a troll. I thought it was hilarious to do. I said, man is the measure of all things, and Heraclitus would be proud. But, or is it Herodotus? I mix those two up. Or the pawn is the measure of all things, which it is in chess, but I'm making fun of Heraclitus, or whatever. Or not fun of, but referencing. But a kid's not gonna get that I'm referencing Heraclitus. But, like, sometimes you like you want to get them out the door and get them to school, and you don't have time to explain for 15 minutes why they can't have candy. And if they think you have candy, they're going to throw like a fit or whatever. But I think if you're proactive about explaining stuff and this type of thing, that you condition your kid to be less likely to be the type that throws a fit, I guess. But also, how you raise kids is only part of like how they turn out. As someone who has seen like a lot of kids who have siblings, and the siblings are just wildly different than the other kids, like the environment is roughly the same. The fact that they turn out wildly different is like a product of genetics. By saying candy is gone, you trigger an intentional behavior, not of giving attention to the unavailable options, which is a good thing. Maybe. In life, the kids will have to, at some point, acquire the skill to have something that is available and not partake in it as a skill. So he's perhaps depriving him of an opportunity to exercise that skill. As a parent of a second grader, yeah. Yeah, with the as a parent, if your kid came back home from like chess class and you're like, Dad, today we learned about diminishing marginal utility. And from now on, I only want to have one piece of candy at a time. So, we got some comments about this is a shift. Because we don't need absolute truth. Or, not that we don't need it. Just that I think it's not possible, because I think this prototypical condition correctly describes how we actually think. May not give a God's eye view of reality and allow for absolute propositions, but it describes best, for people who want to be as accurate as possible, how we actually think. With the title, What is a Chair? Have you talked about the problem of universals, aka the horse is a horse, or just a pale imitation of ideal horse? We didn't go into Platonic ideals. I think that... I mean, Plato was onto something, because he kind of had, like, radial categories, but Plato also thought that there was, like, absolute truth. I do that with Netflix series. I only watch one episode a day. The first episode's probably the most useful. I missed a bit. Can someone tell me what happened? How much did you miss? I think we might go back over the entire thing at the end to round things off. I'm trying to think if there's... This is kind of... Epistemologically, this is kind of where I am now. But then... There's no... No systemic definition of reality that is absolutely true. And what we think and pay attention to, and this is less a part of the discussion, but more kind of what this discussion causes a shift to, is expending a resource. What we attend to is a resource. There are notes. There are notes. So, this, as a result of there being no more absolute truth, I've kind of abdicated trying to think of the hyper-epistemological, detailed philosophical analysis type of things. And instead, it's kind of about the vibes, because that's like how typical conditions work. And there's a bunch of examples of like prototype theory. Like, for example, if you're from the United States and you get asked, they did this study, it was a very interesting study, where people in the United States were asked to rate how similar is Mexico to the United States. And that was the control group. And then a different group was asked, how similar is the United States to Mexico? And it's the darndest thing, people from the United States reported that Mexico is more similar to the United States than the United States is to Mexico. Now, there were two separate groups, just to be as clear as possible, where one was asked one question, one was asked the other question. If someone was asked these two questions simultaneously, they would probably care about being internally consistent and would rate the numbers the same. However, if you ask people from Mexico, they give you the exact reverse pattern, where they say the United States is more similar to Mexico than Mexico is to the United States. And the reason for this is because generally people regard the own country in which they live as a prototypical country, and that it is the best example of a country, and they do this because this is where they live and this is where they're coming from. And so they will judge other countries based on their similarity to their own country, and they will incorrectly infer that other countries are more similar to their own country than they are. I'm gonna leave for 20 minutes. Hope y'all are still going then. I'm reaching the conclusion, and then we'll go back through it, but we're probably gonna be out in 20 minutes. Unless there's a lot of chatter and people have questions, and can do more commentary and this type of thing. And this has been very Cliff Notes version of the progression, but is there something as meta-truth, the existence or lack of a combination of truths? I would say that the way that Western philosophy frames truth doesn't really comport with the way that our brains work and the types of knowledge that is accessible to humans. And they are grasping at something that is their framework that informs their grasping is incorrect. Giving Americans too much credit, they would unironically rate them differently. I'm reporting what the study was, man. From a practical perspective, is there any point to trying to figure out reality? Yeah, I mean, it's useful for me to know that if I jump out my window that it'll break my legs, because it prevents me from jumping out the window. It certainly is a faster way to, reach. But the hyper-abstract stuff, I don't think so, really, that much. The idea is to use a metaphor, and metaphors really inform the way that we think. I think a lot of people who really get into philosophy, they want a greater sense of certainty in an emotional way. And they think if they build knowledge from the ground up, because that's how you build things in a literal sense, that with stronger foundations, they can acquire more certainty emotionally. I think that this is post-hoc misguided, but this is probably kind of where I was. And because I don't think the certainty is achievable anymore. But it is this metaphorical framing of needing to start at the bottom, I think that informs a lot of the really abstract thinking. Which a lot of it's actually just very fascinating, but it's like interesting to be now more as a just, oh, that's interesting thing, than like, I need to get to the bottom of this type of thing. But this desire to start from the bottom and have good, strong foundations is a reasonable notion. Jumping out the window doesn't break your legs, it's hitting the ground afterwards, but true. You input the preposition that they would attempt to be internally consistent. That's not in the study. No, but the intentions regarding the experimental design of having two separate groups for the study, like, that's why they did that. I do believe that is in the, like, I don't know, it's been forever since I, like, looked at it. I don't even know if I read the actual study, but, that is why you would have two groups. I didn't mean Platonic idealism, I was really thinking about medieval realism versus nominalism. Serious discussion of 1200s. I actually don't know. Philosophy before Descartes is, like, between, like, Aristotle and Descartes is not something I'm that familiar with. Real world actually exists, that's why we can attempt to interact with it. This is the basis of rational thought. No ground where you, when you are flowing down the Mississippi, yeah, you can jump out a two-story window. I mean, at a certain point, you hit the speed. You hit the speed. Terminal velocity, and then hitting water is like hitting concrete. Philosophy before Descartes is just Bible studies? Well, I mean, I think we should have learned more about the scholasticism movement, but I think it's historically relevant to see what came before in terms of philosophy. But we're going to go through this. So, kind of went through, to some degree, and spent the longest time on unpacking what is a chair, because I think that this is funny, and is also a really good example of kind of my relationship with truth and philosophy, and how I came to kind of be a subjectivist, or I don't like using the word relativist, because people who are not in an academics context won't take it as an academic perspective, so I would use subjectivist when talking to, like, someone who's not in academic philosophy, but it's like epistemological relativism. It's that the absolute truth is not possible, and this is within their own context. Like, Lakoff probably wouldn't even describe himself as that, but let's go through it. Which is initial search for truth. More than facts about reality, an understanding of truth itself. So seeking an understanding of a knowledge itself, with an infallibility and having absolute truth. This should be a capital T. Should be a capital T truth. And motivation in it, in some degree, was to be able to find what are the right actions I should take, and to some degree is vanity, wanting to be and appear intelligent or something like this. And we reach the type of philosophical knowledge where we have things in necessary and sufficient conditions. We can perfectly categorize everything, and once we have necessary and sufficient conditions, we can have logical operators, and we can find perfect exact truth. And from there, trying to build up knowledge from a groundswell of, like, nothing. And so an example of this is Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which is very technical, point by point, trying to bring up or build up a notion of reality. And then I reached the point where it doesn't seem like we can know much about anything. And this leads to broader skepticism. Non-absolutists might be better way to phrase it. A shipment of 12 tons of Kit Kats was stolen in Italy. That's crazy. That's so much Kit Kats. Ham, was it you? Did you steal the Kit Kats? Proposition is a statement about reality. X is P. Categorical logic seems like a way that we could get to truth, because we can, if we know what X is, then we could do these logical operations. We could say X is P. But categories are problematic. Context shifts the meaning of categories, and categories are actually basically impossible to define with necessary and sufficient conditions, such that you include all the objects and exclude all the objects in a perfect binary type of way. And so then we spent the stream taking some time talking about what exactly is a chair, so that we can evaluate the proposition a chair is a piece of furniture. Because if we don't know what a chair is, we can't evaluate whether or not this is true. And if we can't say a chair is a piece of furniture, then we can't say something much more complicated like honesty is foundational for justice, right? MTAP 8, 12 tons? Okay. Sounds like something I would do, says Ham. Steel? 12 tons. JG believes that UFOs are the trick of the devil. Sounds like the Waterboy's mom. What is a chair? And we came up with a bad definition, or a definition that's not going to work, but the truth is they're all not going to work. 4 legs, a seat for sitting are necessary and mutually sufficient. And then we have, well, rocking chairs and wheelchairs. These don't have feet. And then we got the definition, anything you can sit resting your body. And it's, if my girlfriend sits on my lap, do I become a chair? Was I always a chair? Was I born a chair before I would have been appropriate to be sat on? Do chairs only exist in relation to human function? Can you not have a chair in itself? And we had the definition added, cannot be found naturally, humans have to alter it. Can you not have a painting of a chair? Because it's not for resting. The painting is not. And then a Barbie chair is made, but not for resting, but rather for the Barbie resting. That's so many Kit Kats. 400,000 Kit Kats? Wait, why is there an odd number of Kit Kats? That's insane. It doesn't make sense. There's a right Twix and a left Twix. Oh, there's Kit Kats. Is there an odd number of Kit Kats in the Kit Kat thing? How do you get to 3? Okay. We had the definition for chair is got a back and a seat for sitting. A horse has a back, and you can sit on it. Are they a chair? And a seat for sitting is also kind of circular. And then we go the intention of the thing. Can I not, if it's intended to be sat upon, is it a chair? And then it's, well, what if I don't know what the intention of the person who made it was? This object here. I don't know what the person who made this was thinking. Right? No idea. A seat that appears to be for sitting, independent of context that might render it inappropriate and necessary, is necessary and sufficient. For me, this is the best definition I could come up with using necessary and sufficient conditions. But I've also come to the conclusion that no one can define chair such that it includes all non-chairs, or all chairs and excludes all non-chairs. Everyone knows that a chair is for gaming while the streamer is absent. The chair games. The streamer is actually just a tool from which the chair exhibits its agency. How do we limit the chair from the non-chair? This is a good question. And then we got Ham's definition, authority on the object defines. And then a chair cannot be a chair independent of humanity, and chair status may change depending on the authority changes and who defines the authority. And then we also had the tongue-in-cheek, the authority is the one who survives the most sits. Also just briefly talked about the notion of, the definition of all words is actually just pointing back at other words. If we look at Merriam-Webster's definition for chair, it's just going to be a bunch of words. And then if we look at every one of those words, it's going to be more words. And so, reach the point of some sort of terminal skepticism. We can't know anything about anything because it's impossible to define things in such a way that we can use logical operators on them, and this type of thing is necessary for absolute truth. And perhaps a theoretical sort of knowledge is possible, but practical knowledge is not. And circling back, parallel with this was also my notion that right action requires right knowledge. This was an initial motivation for seeking philosophy. And an idea that came up very early is, and I've never abandoned this, is I'd rather believe something that is useful than something that is true. And this is a little bit nuanced because usually the most useful thing to believe is the truth. But there are some counterexamples. We talked about the Pygmalion effect and Rosenthal effect, and apparently discovered some issues with some of those studies that seem not necessarily conclusive, but issues. There are instances, independent of that study, though, there are instances where belief affects reality and outcome. And then secondarily, belief itself is a sort of action, and it occupies your attention. And what you pay attention to affects living experience. It may be the case that everyone in your curling club is better at curling than you, but you don't have to pay attention to that. And it may be the case that paying attention to that makes you jealous because you can't curl as good as them. See the new world record in Plancia? No, I did not. The chair is the boyfriend and you're the girlfriend? Wait, if someone sits on me, I become a girlfriend? What? Recently, I graciously recommended a video containing Agrippa's trilemma. Interesting it comes here. Is that the words pointing to each other? It's probably not worth spending so much attention on the And so a conclusion I came to, it's probably not worth spending so much time on epistemological investigations of truth if they won't yield anything substantive. This was born out of the idea that theoretical knowledge is possible, but practical knowledge is not. I've kind of abandoned this type of way of thinking a little bit. The very abstract epistemological investigation I think is not possible, but I do think that we can get truths, but they are going to be context-driven and contingent and this type of thing. You know what sport happens in Plancia? No. Oh, regarding empty chair and streamer? You're saying the girls just get played? Bam. You're sitting on a boyfriend right now. So then we kind of have the introduction of prototype theory and grounding in metaphor, and we have George Lakoff, who said, yeah, you know, like this way of thinking, it just doesn't work. The necessary and sufficient conditions and the absolute truth and this type of stuff, we don't actually categorize stuff in this way as humans in terms of how we think. Our grounding is our stuff is grounded in, our ideas are grounded in lived experience. The thinking is associative, and categories are not binary, but are rather radial. Which is to say that some things are a better example of a category. Like a beagle might be a better example of a dog than a wolf. And they have degrees of belonging. And this rejects the philosophical objectivism because that sort of objectivism requires that things be categorized as this either is the thing or it isn't the thing. The trilemma, all arguments boil down to infinite regression, dogma, and catch-22. I agree with the trilemma if I'm operating inside of a framework that is like the Western philosophical tradition. I think that the framework that it operates from to like make those assertions isn't even like the right framework. In a sense, the definition of chair is an anthropological question. We need to study what humans call a chair. It's not a part of absolute truth. I agree with this. The most important lesson I have learned from philosophy is why do I think and believe what I think I believe in? Yes. Is it my upbringing, country I was born in, values, people's surroundings, personal experiences? People hate the notion that most of what they think is informed by their parents and their upbringing, but they also really hate updating any of their foundational views on reality. And what are the odds that when you form like an understanding of reality and you get the first time that you get it right? Because I was like an objective truth type of framework for reality. I just thought you could just know nothing. And now I think you can know stuff. It's just the type of knowledge is not that which is described in Western philosophical objectivism. All our definitions for things point to other words. Language is relational, not just person to person, but internally, word to word. Our original notions of words are informed by an embodied experience, and we have this good is up metaphor. I'm feeling down today. Things are looking up. The grounded nature of how we close down our body when we feel threatened and we open it up when we don't feel threatened, this embodied experience and the physiological things that we associate with down versus up informs our language, where down and up are used to relate to good and bad, and the abstract words of good and bad are informed by a more visceral embodied experience of down and up, and it is the analogical sort of framework that extends the embodied experience to language, and then language spins it up from there, because every definition of word points back to other words. At the end of the road, at the end of the rainbow of all of this, is lived experience. Ski jumping, specifically the ski flying discipline, is one of the two biggest jumps. The others, this season's always in Plancia. Oh, interesting. I'm not going to watch that on stream, though, because depending on... You get bopped sometimes. If I show anything from the Olympics, I'll get bopped. Olympics really likes to copyright strike everything. Although I guess how much do I care, because I'm not sure this VOD will get so many... Yeah, okay. But we talked a little bit about the example of a lie. The philosophically objectivist and necessary and sufficient conditions might say that law is speaking something that is not a statement of fact. The problem, there are some problems here. I can deceive without saying an untruth. I can unintentionally speak an untruth. And I can speak them as truth without maliciousness. Which enters prototypical conditions. And what Lakoff argues is that for our categories, we don't think of things in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. Instead, when we say a category of a thing like dog, you think of a particular dog, and the degree to which you think of things as belonging to the category of dog are the degree to which they resemble it, which means we have degrees of belonging. For example, if I asked you to categorize, is a cat a dog or a bear, you would be able to put the cat into a category of dog or bear as being more belonging to one category than the other, which for Western philosophy is something that should just be categorically impossible, because it's neither a dog or a bear. But you know that a cat is more similar to it's more dog than it is bear, right? But for a lie, there's actually 3 prototypical conditions. The intention to deceive, which is the most important. What you're saying you have to believe to be false, so if you accidentally misinform someone, it's generally not a very good example of a lie, and the statement's actually untrue. If you have any of these conditions, something can be kind of a lie, but the best examples of lie have all 3, and for them, the most important characteristic is the intent to deceive someone when defining lie. And so we have the example, does this dress make me look fat? And if you respond to this by saying, no, the dress doesn't make you look fat, when it does indeed, this is not a very good example of a lie, because your intention is not to deceive. Your intention here is to keep things on an even keel. But also we have a secondary layer to this as an example, which is that oftentimes this question, does this dress make me look fat, doesn't actually mean, does this dress make me look fat? Oftentimes we have a lot of performative phrases, or when we say something, we're actually meaning something else. Oftentimes communication is not literally what we say. The above is not really a question, but it's a request for validation, right? How do I look actually I think is more information seeking than does this make me look fat. But Like, if someone... a lot of chit-chat and, like, useless banter that people engage in isn't really about the... Talking about the weather is not talking about the weather. Talking about the weather is saying, hey, I'm not a psychopath that's socially maladjusted. Right? And it's a performative thing. But what we're doing is not literally what we're saying. Incidentally, like, I feel like male to male, like, one of the most common threads of discussion is, like, sports. And, like, I hate talking about sports. So, like, I'm really bad at, like, the bantery chit-chat, performance regarding that. And I think it makes me seem standoffish and, like, a bit of an asshole when, like, men try and engage me in discussion. And they're not actually asking me what my favorite sports team is. That's not what they're asking me. They're like, I want to open up a conversation with you. Here is a performative means by which we do that. Right? Although they might be more asking, they're trying to open up a dialogue in terms of intent and, like, what they're trying to do. They're not interrogating me about my favorite sports team. Pragmatics, huh? Oh, I meant to talk about William James a little bit, but I didn't get to it. The four sides of a message? Pragmatics, yeah. I didn't mean to entirely couch it in pragmatics, but yeah, I think that would be... Yeah. I've read some William James. One of the favorite things I like about William James, or one thing that I recall that I thought was really funny when reading him, is when an idea is good, he'll call it thick. And I was like, ooh, girl, you thick. Like, I think it's in pragmatics. He introduces that language rather deliberately to call an idea thick or thin, depending on, which is like, thick versus thin is a spectrum, right? And so it's kind of radial. It's degrees of belonging. So rather than true or untrue, you have like thick or thin, or this type of thing. The way you said it makes it seem like you don't know the four sides. I don't know the four sides. I'm not familiar with this. You may be a master debater, but I'm a cunning linguist. Yeah. But this is a shift in approach in terms of the way we think about truth and this type of thing, is that prototypical conditions may not give a God's eye view of reality, and absolute propositions describe best how we actually think, and are thus the basis for the type of knowledge we can have access to, which is not the God's eye view of reality knowledge. And then the focus here shifts to the practical. No attempt to systemically define reality absolute truth. In reality is like a foundational project, and instead more practical knowledge in individual spheres. And what we think, and this is kind of the interpretation I've come to, what we think and pay attention to is expending a resource. What we attend to and think is a resource. I repeated myself. I made you pay attention to it twice because it was extra important. I should look it up. Four sides of a message. I will look it up actually. Just join. Can I ask you a question? You can. We are on our way out though. But we will respond a little bit and then be on our way. Of a message. So for me, this is like a way of interpreting it, but this is just a lens. Just like reading through, like knee-jerk reaction. So this is, I think this is a model of reality, but wouldn't perfectly capture reality. But this sounds like something I think is a useful model for analyzing when someone says something. What's actually occurring? There's the factual content. This side conveys information or facts contained in the message. It answers the question, what is being said? Does this dress make me look fat? The meeting starts at 10 is the factual content time of the meeting. Then we have self-revelation. This aspect reveals something about the sender, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It addresses the question, what does the sender reveal about themselves? So, does this dress make me look fat? Maybe reveals insecurity. For instance, if the sender expresses frustration at the meeting time, it may indicate a busy schedule or personal feelings about the meeting. And then relationship. This side reflects the sender's perception of the relationship with the receiver. Does this dress make me look fat? Implies that you are someone whose opinion on the matter matters. It answers the question, how does the sender view the receiver? Etc., etc. You need to be more punctual. Okay? And then appeal. This indicates what the sender wants the receiver to do or how they want them to respond. Answering the question, does this make me look fat? The appeal is much different than the factual content. It addresses the question, what does the sender want from the resender? Okay. So I would say that's like a framework for interpreting a message, but isn't like an absolute truth of how messages work. It's like mildly reminiscent of Myers-Briggs. So I think Myers-Briggs, although not as severe as Myers-Briggs in terms of... Myers-Briggs is a way of characterizing people based on personality traits, but at the end of the day. Usually when people say at the end of the day, they're about to say something like mildly derogatory, I think. Is that right? Maybe not. Myers-Briggs can categorize every single person into a spectrum of multiple personality traits, but the personality traits don't exist in the abstract. It's just a way of categorizing people and forming a framework of analysis. The 4 sides of the message seems to be a similar thing. This is probably an interesting model for things, though. Because, yeah, especially if you are the type of person, let's say, that over-focuses on factual content, you'll miss what's going on a lot. But yeah, when some dude asks you what your favorite sports team is, he's asking you his favorite sports team, but he's indicating that he wants to have a conversation with you. And this is different than actually asking about sports team. So if you're a dick and you say, I don't like sports, as your response, what you reveal to him in that communication is you're an asshole and you don't want to talk to him. Have you read anything by David Berlinski? I have not. This is more about linguistics. No, I mean, I think that seems like a good model. I'm not familiar with it. Let's look at David Berlinski. Pretty sure I haven't looked up any. I haven't seen anything of him. Opponent of evolution. Well, I believe in the theory of evolution, so maybe be interesting. PhD in 68. Well-tempered Wittgenstein. Okay. So we have several things in mathematics. But this seems to be like the most striking thing that they emphasize. Opponent to biological evolution. Senior fellows at Discovery Institute of Scientific Culture, Seattle-based think tank that promotes the idea of intelligent design. I mean, I've seen a lot of this argument. on both sides. Is there a video that tells us about your background? You have a lot of videos? Not so much. No, I don't really have a video exploring the history of thought. I mean, like, this stream we kind of explored my relationship with truth vis-a-vis kind of an evolution in thinking and a shift towards a model of truth that is more or less proposed by Lakoff. I wouldn't say it's like a carbon copy, but unpacking that would take a substantial amount of time. He does not pronounce the D. Avid Berlinski? Some of the first videos are on this. I don't even think the first videos are on this. I mean, a little bit, I think, of the first ones on the stream. I have, like, my very first videos are some mind maps. And I explain why I'm starting to do YouTube, because this was my first YouTube channel. And then I also talk about... One of them is my framework for understanding reality, which isn't actually... I think the traditional way that people try and build a model for reality is like they build a foundation and then they build up from there. And I don't think this is how it looks like a cake, but I don't think this is actually how we think. I think that the way that we form our understanding of reality is more like a web. And every single thing that we think is like a strand. And some of these are better than others, but this is like a model for reality. So, 4 sides of the message, this is a model. This is like one of these. And then evolutionary biology, or rejection of it. He does not promote, Berlinski does not promote intelligent design. This same David Berlinski? I mean, then the Wikipedia article is wrong, but I kind of assume that it's the Wikipedia article is going to be more likely correct than someone in chat. I don't mean this like in an offensive way, because I don't know you, just like an immediate knee-jerk thing. But we might also have Lakoff's understanding of prototype theory. We might have, you know, it's another model. Memetics, where we apply evolutionary biology. I'm just thinking evolutionary biology because it came out. Memetics applies evolutionary biology to stuff. We might have Plato's Republic. And through our various ways of looking at reality, we form a web. And we can apprehend multiple things and process them through multiple designs, but the idea is our goal is to apprehend reality and to be able to catch reality and come up with a way of understanding it that allows us for effective action. And so more models and useful models that correctly predict reality and allow you to act within it, are going to be useful. And so it's less about trying to find an absolute sort of truth, and more about trying to find a useful way of looking at things that won't always be useful in every context. Not every single model can capture every single thing about lived experience. You need a confluence of models and ways of looking at things. And so rejection of absolute truth and instead a sort of idea that we need to be flexible. And so this means you can have 2 models of reality that are inconsistent and make them part of your web. He simply points to inconsistent issues with evolution. But the think tank still promotes the idea of intelligent design, yes? And he's part of it as the skeptic or something like this? Rather than... He doesn't go as far as to say intelligent design is correct, but he provides a skeptic accounting of evolution for the Institute, I suppose, would be a way to reconcile this. There's a context aspect thing, though. For example, if you're at a book reading and someone tells you your favorite sports team, you say, I don't like sports, not so much of a dick. Yes, 100%. But like, if I'm in the sauna and I'm sitting next to a guy and he asks me what's my favorite sports team, I'd be an asshole. Yeah. What area of expertise? I have a degree in philosophy. I also studied quite a bit of psychology and economics. Secular agnostic, yeah. Or secular Jew. Think of ideas as points in the brain, and then they're connected to other points, parallel or not. The parallel ones are the references, metaphors, memes. It's one way of interpreting it. That would be that. Exactly, you nailed it. Yeah. Because the Wikipedia article doesn't say that he himself espouses it or whatever. But some models are better than others. But what viewing reality in this way does is it allows for inconsistencies in your worldview. And I think that actually trying to describe reality in a correct way requires kind of a high tolerance for chaos. And that people take comfort in absolutes. And then is context driven, and appropriateness of models is context driven, and multiple inconsistent models can be regarded. So, I can, for example, think that Myers-Briggs, which is a personality quiz, is not really rooted in anything real. But I can simultaneously think that sorting myself into a Myers-Briggs category and reading kind of the stuff that Myers-Briggs spits out as being useful for organizing my life, it gives me a sense of direction. That's kind of not what I think. I kind of think that Myers-Briggs is a little bit like astrology for... I think it's a little bit like astrology, but I also think that astrology can be useful. It's not necessarily something that should be outright rejected. If someone believes in astrology and that astrology like gives their life a sense of organization in some sort of way and allows them to engage in useful actions on a higher frequency, then the astrology is actually useful to believe. It's like a gamble. There's a chance of it being truth, like non-observed particles waves. A little bit like a gamble, yes. It's more like, the more models you have, and the better they have, and the better they are, makes it more likely that you will be able to respond to reality in a productive way. Absolutes are just temporary conveniences in an ever-changing and possibly random world. Yes, but people really love absolutes. They do not treat them as temporary things. They treat them as absolutes. Now turn the lines into arrows and you have a model of how neurons actually work. Via firing and association, yeah. Although, I think that's an oversimplification. Myers-Briggs test is not a good test, psychometrically. Yeah, but like the big five are also just made up too, right? I think the big five is more useful than the Myers-Briggs. I'm just saying that I would say that they maybe lie on some sort of spectrum where Myers-Briggs is decidedly less arbitrary than astrology. And the big five is probably less... Here, let's pull that up for everyone, because you know what I mean, but... Not everyone might not know what the big five is. So the model... there's a model in psychology for the big five psychological traits that are used in a bunch of different experiments, and they kind of form for a lot of the studies on personality. These are the five that get used a lot, but in some sort of sense, everything that studies this is based on having an operational definition for these five characteristics that will be exhibited in traits. That's kind of a made-up operational definition, and these categories are made up, and there's, in my opinion, some arbitrariness, but it seems less arbitrary than Myers-Briggs. But the big five traits, ocean, are openness, willing to try and experience new things, conscientiousness, attention to be organized, dependable, and disciplined, extroversion, the degree to which a person is outgoing, sociable, and energetic. I think that this definition has more to do with whether or not this depletes you rather than not depletes you, rather than like how extroverted you appear, I guess, but okay. Agreeableness, the measure of how friendly, compassionate, and cooperative a person is, and neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety and depression. These traits provide a comprehensive framework for understanding personality and influence various aspects of behavior and relationships. Just more reliable tests, yeah. I don't like response and productiveness here. Pretty sure all these tests don't distinguish between behavior and consciousness. Almost all of these tests are by self-report. So I don't know if you mean that self-reporting is a behavior rather than consciousness itself, or whether you mean that the traits, as they are defined for the purposes of psychological studies, usually these traits are defined in terms of behavior because you can observe behavior. And then when they are done by self-report, they're done by self-report. I don't know if you mean to say that self-report is a behavior, or that it doesn't give a reliable thing, but yeah. Doc's not happy. There's not much context there. I just mean self-assessment is inherently subjective just by quirk fiction. Yeah, but nailing down nailing down personality or like consciousness at all is just like a very, very difficult task. No, I mean, I'm not calling you out for spamming. I'm saying I have no idea what you're responding to, so it's like can't respond. I don't know what to. There's a lot of things that you could face droopy red eyes to in the YouTube emote parlance. I found the stream an opportunity to solicit a review from you. A review of a book? Or a review of the guy? I haven't read the book though. How could I review it? Oh, you want to try and get me to read? I have like a 2-read pile that's really big. So like I don't really take requests as much. I actually recently picked up a bunch of short books I want to try and get through. There was another one. Scholarly communication. To review The Devil's Delusion. I could take a quick look at it. Campaign finance. Campaign, election, and threat to democracy. And all of these are on the What Everyone Needs to Know series. I also have one on the Middle East. These are relatively short. Oxford University Press. I generally like the series a lot because it seems like the best series I've been able to find to very briefly and with good information and without a lot of bias introduce kind of the concept. Alright. What's the name of the book? "2008, Berlinski." Defending the religious point of view. Berlinski expresses skepticism towards one of the core tenets of Darwin's ideas, using mathematical and stochastic principles. Mounts a series of arguments to challenge the Darwinian explanation of life and suggests that evolution is fundamental organizing principles flawed. Alright, there's not a lot I can do with this. Reviewing a book you haven't read is actually really easy. Oh, you want me to read the whole book? It's 256 pages, mate. I mean, I can read this in a day, but like... I'd rather read a summary of his argument. Screw you, EU5 man, let's read a book. I thought about doing a book read stream. I think it violates, like, TOS or copyright in some way. Dude, you're a genius. Thank you. I appreciate it, but I recently... In the abstract, I'm not opposed to reading an objection. Let's maybe try and find out what his argument is. The thing is, I can't show Amazon because Amazon likes to show my address. So, like, we're not gonna do that. Let's just see some quotes. which of course are going to be completely devoid of context, but this is going to be faster. Has anyone proved God's in existence? I don't think people aren't trying to make this claim. They're just trying to make an argument that he hasn't been proven to exist. Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe, or why is it here? Not even close. Okay. Have our sciences explained the universe seemed fine-tuned and allowed for existence life? Not even close. I mean, this sounds like New Earth creationist. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything as long as it's a not religious thought? Close enough. I've seen arguments along this parallel. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a source of good? Not close enough to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the science or philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Okay. This quote, is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise of intellectual contempt? Dead on. I have seen a lot of arguments for the existence of God in the study of philosophy, because that's like, in your lower division courses, that's like 40% of what you study or something like this. And maybe not 40%, but it's a lot. And proving God's inexistence is not a reasonable task to be set, because I cannot prove the inexistence of anything. The burden of proof is on existence. Being able to explain why stuff is here or how existence started is also not required for disbelief. I don't think that our universe is very fine-tuned for the existence of life, so life seems very much impossible in most of it. And I've seen a lot of people trying to attempt to reconcile a lot of biology, physicists, and philosophy with the existence of God, because Descartes starts off with a very, very broad skepticism, and then he uses it, therefore God exists. Berkeley does the same. You have centuries of philosophers making arguments for very, very robust and thorough skepticism, and then not applying that skepticism, in my opinion, to God. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? This is an entirely discussion onto its own. But this guy, he sounds like a creationist. I mean, maybe he says he's not, but I'm saying the arguments that he's putting forth sound like them. And then has secularism, there's been... This one, I think that both religious and non-religious people do terrible things. And people like to point towards Stalin. And people also like to point to the Nazis, and that one doesn't make an entirely big amount of sense to me. Because... I think the first alliance that they made was, with the papacy. Their belt buckle said, Gott mit uns, God is with us. And so, I think the notion that they are, atheists or something is silly, but secondarily, I think that, the Crusades were brutal. Those were done in the name of religion. I don't think that makes the religion make people immoral, as an argument. I think that religious or not, people do terrible things. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in the sciences? This might be true. Does anything the sciences Does anything in the sciences or their philosophy justify the religious claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. I have studied almost every, like, in philosophy, almost every argument for God's existence. And I've not found any one of them substantive. I do think there's a brand of atheism, though, that's like the militant atheists that are, like, intolerant in their own way and are, what is it, oh, I forget the name for when you're, like, proselytizing. Evangelical in their structure and intolerant at the same time. It doesn't matter if you consider religion / spirituality, the universe formed due to some laws, likely physical, which birthed human consciousness surrounding. The clockmaker theory, like, is a way to, like, reconcile basically all of, like, science and, like, creationism, where you're just like, God set it up and then he let it play, but then, like, Occam's razor. Getting a bit sidetracked with the book. I think it's kind of fine, because we're kind of at the end a little bit to, like, what I wanted to push on to. He talks about Wittgenstein, Gödel, etc. That he's deeper than that. I mean, I'm saying what this sounds like is, like, creationism. And then the next one is, like, this, these guys didn't believe in God and they did horrible things, therefore structure. Berlinski traces the intellectual history. Essentialism, the view that things have necessary defining properties. Largely discredited. I mean, I don't think that I would agree with essentialism. I'd have to see a more precise definition of it. Who's it that said any event that cannot be explained is indistinguishable from magic or God miracles? I can't remember. But I'm not saying he is a creationist either when I say that. I'm saying this is the exact argument I've seen creationists make. And the, like, you can go through a lot of instances of someone being religious and doing horrible things too, so I don't like these arguments as much. They're not, like, empirically rigorous to, like, here's an example of an atheist that did awful things, here's an example of a religious person that did awful things. The Ease of Math physics paper shows our universe is not even in the same local maximum of supporting life, so fine-tuning is nonsense. Kripke showed that identity statements, if true, are necessarily true. I'm trying to remember by Kripke, because I've read a decent amount of Kripke. It seems conceivable that pain could exist without C fibers, which means that identity claim could be a modal claim. I mean, I know a lot about pain, because I've read Being in Pain or Grahek's book, Nicola Grahek. Forget if it's being in pain, feeling pain and being in pain, some permutation. There's a difference between feeling pain and being in pain. but the true in all possible worlds, necessity, these types of things. To go back to like the way that I kind of frame reality, I've seen Kripke, I've seen that, I've seen a lot of philosophy of language, and for me that comes into the seeking of absolute truths, which I think that it invokes a lot of examples where a lot of the categories of things that are being operated on are not fully discrete and perfect categories. Like, C fiber is probably not even a perfect category anyways, but like also pain, because you can be in pain and then you can feel in pain, you can feel pain, and these are actually two different events if you read Grahek. Where feeling pain, the ability to localize pain, and the affective response are actually two distinct events, and you can have a pain experience that's you are mistaken about. If you have, there are several disorders which cause it, some of which, like, you feel pain, you have the affective response, but it wouldn't be in response to C fibers firing. If you have, like, there's psychological disorders which just cause you to be in unending pain, regardless of there being no physical firing of, like, C fibers. And some people have pain disorders where they can localize it, but they don't have an affective response. Talks about militant atheism. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that movement, but God is the most awesome thing you can conceive of, and existence is more awesome than its non-existence, so it must exist. Yeah. Could God make a burrito so big he would be incapable of eating it? Checkmate type of argument. Could you just choose to become religious for the psychological benefits, sort of like Pascal's wager? Yes, but I think that the costs are costs exceed the benefits. Read the next quote on your page. If moral statements are about something, then the universe is not quite as science suggests it. If moral statements are about something, then the universe is not quite as science suggests it. Since physical theories, having said nothing about God, say nothing about right or wrong, good or bad. To admit this would force philosophers to confront the possibility that the physical sciences offer a grossly inadequate view of reality. I mean, the physical sciences don't comment on morality. They don't pretend to. You can't study morality with the scientific method. In, like, trying to deduce objective morality. And since philosophers very much wish to think of themselves as scientists, I don't think that this is true at all, because they don't use the scientific method. This would offer them an unattractive choice between changing their allegiances or accepting its irrelevance. I don't think that this... I've met a lot of professors whose area of study is, like, morality. And they would not think of themselves as scientists whatsoever because they do not use the scientific method. Yeah, I think that this is the I think the people who are writing the moral theories are not. One of the things that philosophy is if something can be a science, if you can use the experimental method on it, generally it stops being philosophy and it becomes its own discipline. Atheist can make a conscious decision to indoctrinate himself, becoming religious in order to believe the psychological benefits. I actually considered this. I myself considered trying to do this. I'd rather believe something that is useful than is true. I actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about this. Whether it's more useful to believe or not. And I came to the conclusion it's not. Being part of a community is useful, though. So it could be, in theory, useful to pretend to believe. But even getting more access to communities, I thought it was not useful. What's your thought on people using religions to blame things on God by saying it was his will instead of taking responsibility? Oh, I think that's silly. But determining if our consciousness, our existence, carries more meaning than an epiphenomenon in the brain, otherwise life is meaningless. I'm inclined to say life does not have some a priori meaning. I would give reference to the existentialists. I don't think there is a meaning that is abstract before the existence of life. And you create meaning, but there's not some meaning out in the aether. Nor is there meaninglessness. Like, both of these are made-up things. Berlinski demonstrates that the matter is not settled. I think if you read... most people in philosophy are not hard atheists of the sort that this guy is trying to paint. With this sentence, he seems to trying to ascribe a belief to philosophers that are atheists, which are more technically agnostics, which the vast majority of them don't hold. They hold that there's no good argument for the existence of God, and on that basis I shouldn't believe in God's existence. Much in the same way that there's no good proof of the existence of unicorns, so I shouldn't believe in the existence of unicorns. And that they also don't think that this is forthcoming. But this is a much different argument that he is painting onto them. He's painting them having... And some people have that position that he's arguing that they do, but this is not at all common in philosophy. That atheism that is proof of God's existence, claiming to have this. Because you can't really prove that something doesn't exist. And a philosopher would just tell you that. Or like, a philosopher in academia would say that that's an unfair criteria. So claiming that they claim to do this and then fail to do this seems, in my opinion, somewhat... If he claims that people are doing this in a widespread sort of way, I think he's either misinformed or it's a shabby trick. And I would not call the notion of whether or not a unicorn exists, like, something that's not considered settled. He criticizes the scientific method of Karl Popper. Yeah, it has issues. But, like, it's also a really good way of forming theories that allow us to predict what will happen, which is really useful. Liftable stone argument is not a dunk philosophers think it is. No, I mean, I think it's... I think the unliftable stone, uneatable burrito, like, I'm being flippant when I bring it up. How can you leave in peace if nihilism is true? I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are moral that don't believe in objective morality. If consciousness exists, then God exists. I don't think that God follows from consciousness unless you have a radically different definition from God than I do. If God is like somehow defined as a precondition for consciousness, and consciousness is defined as like the experience that we are having, then it's like definitionally true. But then if you turn around and say God's all these other things too, then the definition's being expanded. Wouldn't the best thing to be figure out if indeed a deity exists and whether there's meaningful in your lives? I'm saying that I have examined nearly every argument that is part of the philosophical tradition that has any sort of traction, and none of them, in my mind, were satisfactory for demonstrating the existence of God. You will never know God. I agree. But this guy, based on reading the quotes, the guy seems like, he seems like, like Jordan Peterson refuses to say that he's a Christian, but he's obviously Christian. This guy, he does not seem like he's not a theist. Because when you... an absence of a satisfactory answer provided by science, when your first conclusion you jump to fill that void is God, then you are coming from a perspective of believing in God first, if that's what you want to just immediately fill the void, rather than just having skepticism or a gap in your knowledge. And if your first instinct, or if what you think the natural conclusion of such a gap in knowledge is God, then I don't think you're like an atheist. Or do we all vanish to nothingness after we die? I think that is likely what happens, yes. Do you know about Alex O'Connor? Yes. Rational skeptic? Cosmic skeptic? Something like this? It's not God of the Gaps, it's much deeper than that. I'm talking about God of the Gaps? Yes, kind of. He talks about structural issues like human nature and mathematics. I think he may talk... I'm not going to read a 256-page book on stream right now. But I'm saying, I think that he is starting with a conclusion in mind, and then goes out in search of it. Based on how he's talking. But, yeah, I've studied so much arguments for God's existence. I've watched so many debates between theists and atheists. Not for now, Pete. If you read it and make a video, then we can discuss the comments under your video. I'm probably not going to read it. I've done an enormous consumption of these types of arguments. I don't think this does not look like a novelty to me. Cosmic Skeptic, yeah, the guy who dedicated so dedicated that he studied theology, knows the Bible better than the guy he debates. Having English as your second language does produce interesting products of speech. English is not great. No, you're fine. I understand. I'm just... If there's something that... If there's something that doesn't comport with the way that I view reality, and his argument I'm completely unfamiliar with, and it's on something substantive. Like, I recently read a book by Bjorn Lomborg that I thought was going to be inconsistent with the way I was looking at things. Although, to be fair, I am kind of a fan of Bjorn Lomborg, so maybe I didn't think it was going to be that inconsistent, but he's a little bit more skeptic on the environmentalism stuff. Let's find the books. The one that I read, because I was expecting. So, False Alarm's the one I read. Unfortunately, there's no article. But his argument is not that it isn't happening. Fanny Door, thank you for the follow. But he does think that our approach to it is not very good. And he approaches things from the perspective of efficiency, and in particular, this book that I was a fan of was How to Make $50 Billion to Make the World a Better Place. Now, I've been thinking of... I finished False Alarm a few weeks ago. I've been thinking of how I want to review it, especially because I still have some skepticism regarding it, and there's some complexity. But the point I'm trying to make here, or the reason I bring this up, is I read this book because I thought it was something... it was a counterexample to the view I held going into it, which is climate change is happening, it's a big problem, we should do something about it. And I read it because it was going against the view that I have. And I do this a lot, or I try and do this a lot with books where I read things where I think that they're going to be wrong. But I won't necessarily do it over and over and over again. And I have read an enormous amount of defenses of the existence of God. I guess I've seen less rejections of specifically fewer rejections specifically of evolution. But what this seems to be, I gotta be careful what I click on. Because I don't want, like, autofill to, like, show my address or some stupid shit. This doesn't seem to be specifically picking apart evolution so much as it seems to be, although I don't like militant atheism, I dislike it in an oblique way. But yeah, this is a response to, as they like to be coined, or actually not even they like to be coined, as supporters of them like to coin them, the four horsemen of the anti-apocalypse, or whatever. Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and Dawkins. I don't think that this is coming from a place of specifically addressing evolution on its merits or lack thereof. And I've read a lot of study on evolution and also like referenced stuff and checked stuff out and this type of thing. This seems less about the evolution and more about arguing for God's existence / attacking militant atheists. Although, to be fair, if you wanted to have a discussion about militant atheism and why it's problematic, I have feelings both ways about that, but in general, I think it's problematic. But is there an email address we can reach out to you? I don't want to respond to emails. I don't want to show my email on stream. I apologize, but I just I don't want to be available in that way. I'm wondering how puzzled people like us can live peacefully in if life is truly meaningless, it would go into nothingness and death. If I could choose for there to be some inherent meaning of life, I would. That I don't think there is does not induce me to be violent because I have empathy. Because I care about the experience of other people. I think that, if you need, and I'm not saying this is your position, I think if you need fear of a god to make you treat your fellow humans correctly, and that fear of God makes you treat them correctly, that doesn't make you... If the fear of the god is somehow necessary, then you're probably not actually, like, that moral. Like, you be moral for its own sake. But I don't think it is some objective fact, and I don't think it's an objective fact contingent on God. Talking about meaning? Maybe I'm not at peace. But it's... The lack of a god is not something I lose sleep about, or think about often, except in, like, an academic, intellectual sense. Life is full of suffering and heartache. Our parents will die, our friends will disappear, we may get sick. Yes, I agree. Not even going to morality. I agree all these things will happen. Yes. What are some books you would suggest for laying foundations for more complex psychology subjects? Psychology specifically? I like Thinking Fast and Slow a lot. Like, a lot. Life is full of meaning information. If there's no meaning, maybe there is meaning. How do veridical NDEs? I don't even know what this is. Although I think we're gonna wrap up. Near-death experience? Yeah, I think that I've seen near-death experience stuff. I think a lot of the... near-death experience stuff that I've seen is, like, I think, non-substantive. And I also think that very often there's people who have a incentive to say that their near-death experience was something else. You said it as I did? Yeah. What do you think the urge to believe in God when facing certain death? I mean, a lot of atheists just don't... I think that there's a widespread urge among people who are atheists to suddenly believe in God as they approach death is, to me, seems to be... I don't think that's actually, like, a thing that's common. I think that is kind of a fiction. Is your highest rated book, after all? Inflated score, IMO? Yeah, it might be a little inflated. It's not all debunked. What I've looked at seems not substantive. And stuff that is... the information regarding near-death experiences is like self-report, which I consider like generally unreliable. When my ex-wife needed an emergency surgery, I asked her religious friend to pray for her. Okay. People who are clinically dead. Well, okay, the clinical definition for... know things that they weren't supposed to know. Those have been documented. Yes, I've heard of such instances. But I also think that the reports there are anecdotal in that the people reporting that they didn't know this thing ahead of time when they could have been informed after the fact and then are now reporting that they knew this thing ahead of time in a way that is we do not have situation where someone is live streamed after they nearly died. They wake up and they receive no prompting or consultation from either friends, family, loved ones, or doctors, and immediately sits up and says, this has happened while I was dying, or this will happen, or this type of thing. There's not a good example of that, nor is there an example of someone predicting something, having a near-death experience, predicting something that would come to pass, and then that thing coming to pass. That has been observed in some sort of robust way. It's all post hoc. They knew information they couldn't possibly know, but they are self-reporting that they knew this information that they couldn't know, or someone is reporting on behalf of them. And an anecdote like this is not, in my mind, strong evidence for the existence of God. Strong evidence for the existence of, blue whales is that, you can show me a blue whale. You can show me a video of the blue whale. I guess I've not seen a blue whale personally. I've seen a skeleton of a blue whale. But, I think this stream, we came to the conclusion that no matter is settled. I don't think anything's, settled in an absolute sense. I would not be an atheist of this kind, provided proofs of God's in existence, but I don't think that this is a reasonable bar. There are papers on PubMed. Dead chat. Womp womp. This guy comes in, goes from YouTube to the Twitch immediately. No link to no chair. So what is actually a chair? The Ware study under Sam Parnia produced limited but non-zero results. Also, beyond the issue of anecdotes, even if someone can say something about something else, that doesn't mean that God, with all of its additional entailments, would exist. Not that I'm saying... I also don't think that people gain knowledge in near-death experiences of things that they have no connection to. But even that, if that were the case, that wouldn't prove God's existence. A chair is a collection of quantum waveforms arranged in a chair-like shape. Let's go back to our web, where we feel safe. What is a chair-like shape? Exactly. It's time to get off the chair, stretch, take a walk. Yeah. Religiousness is going down, so the matter is settling. Well, consensus of humanity doesn't mean truth. If all of humanity believes one thing, it doesn't mean it's the case. or fails to believe one thing. What people tend to believe is less a function of what is true and more a function of what is good at spreading as an idea. And okay, invoking genetics maybe isn't the popular thing here right here, but memetics is when you apply the ideas of evolutionary biology to units of cultural information, or memes, before they were co-opted to be memes today, which is funny things, although a meme is still a meme. A meme in a convention, or a meme in a contemporary sense, is still a meme in the original usage of the word by Dawkins. But ideas tend to spread not if they are good, but if they are easy to reproduce. And that is a better indication. So ideas that are simple, ideas that are simple, ideas that are sensational, are easier to reproduce. Coined by Dawkins and Selfish Gene. Memeplexes. I'm really looking for fecundity, fidelity. Yeah, there we go. Describes units of memes as the smallest elements that replicate themselves with reliability and fecundity. So if they spread themselves well and also are very easy to reproduce or reliably reproduce. So a really good example of something that is good memes, or is a strong meme, is like there's razor blades in the candy in Halloween that they're putting in kids' sacks. And this is really easy to reproduce because it's very, very simple. It doesn't take a long time to say. It concerns danger and kids, which makes it more likely to be repeated as something. But when I have looked up cases in which there are razor blades in candy, I have been unable to find a single instance of this happening. Now, this may have happened somewhat more recently. I've stopped looking it up, but I used to look it up like every Halloween, or attempt to look it up. And the fact that the warnings about razor blades in the candy are prolific, while simultaneously events of that happening are, as far as I can tell, non-existent, is a very striking example of this being a very good meme. It's very easy to reproduce. And you want to reproduce it because it is concerning stuff that is anything related to danger or sex, or this type of stuff tends to be more prolific. It's not a good idea, though, because it doesn't comport with reality. You could say ideas with bigger easiness plus times importance. Something like this. We might be done in 20 minutes. 2 hours later, what is a chair, basically? But, so when we say the religious matter is settling because fewer people believe, people tend to believe this more so than what actually comports with reality. And models of reality that are complex tend not to do so well, even if they're better models of reality. Unless the complexity is the point, which is another layer. But I think that we will wrap it up here. Chair doesn't exist, it can only be approximated. There we go. Approximately a chair. I guess maybe I should just, like, leave the chair. That is a chair. Alright. But we'll say goodbye to the YouTubers. Goodbye, YouTubers. And we'll say goodbye to the Twitch